What you're about to learn is probably the most earth-shattering disclosure that most of you have ever heard or had the opportunity to hear. This is the kind of stuff that starts wars. This call, this video, you should save. What I'm telling you is to go download now a YouTube downloader and then right-click this call, this video, to your own memory device, your own computer, because this is the kind of thing that does end up getting removed, and it's a matter of time before that happens to this video. Let me preface it all by talking about 2013. In 2013, to any citizen, and from your perspective, it obviously looked like there was kind of a sudden, coordinated, multi-front legal attack against me by every law enforcement agency in multiple layers of government, state, federal, local, even the military, and all at once and completely out of the blue. But now that we have all seen what a coordinated lawfare attack against a single individual kind of looks like, we can more easily recognize that when it happens, and recognize the contrived and political nature of it. But way back in 2013, when it happened to me, and I'll remind you, my name is not Trump, really no one knew what to make of this kind of thing, and the attacks were actually far more serious than for him, far more sudden, and they held even greater consequences, if you could imagine that. In 2013, this was still kind of a novel concept. I was certainly naive to it. People in 2013 were still naive to the way that the conviction machine has actually become weaponized. People in other countries, it's interesting, I don't want to get too far off course, but people in other countries, they recognize that their law enforcement is corrupt. Here in this country, we need that illusion that it isn't for some reason. But the preferred weapon, in fact, of a political big government party, a party enforcement apparatus, if you will, our grandparents in the 1930s and the 1940s, they would have seen this exemplified in the brown shirts in Europe. And just prior to that, seeing the same party, the Democrat Party, weaponize their own thugs and call it the Klan. But modern day, however, that party has long learned to use and has long infiltrated the courts with kind of badged enforcers at their side who know that their new role isn't about solving some case, but about going after some designated legal victim, a target. So how does it happen that seemingly outstanding, kind of well-received, respected, contributing citizen with a lily-white history, if you will, and record, just kind of instantly becomes branded as the lowest of criminals? An exemplary life after decades is so suddenly smeared, becomes that target. How does that happen? Why did this new sudden target just all of a sudden, all at once, just go bad? Well, here's what really happened. And by the way, the Netflix guys knew all of this. They turned over a lot of very well-hidden...
This call is from a federal prison.
Yes, we knew that. Well-hidden rocks. You know only the very surface level story, the one that was fed to you. And that's wrong. That's false. It's very, very much deeper than that, as you probably already have surmised and just didn't know what was under the surface. But let me tell you that deep below the surface, it looks like all those different agencies, all those different levels of government and jurisdiction, they all kind of acted in concert, collusion, same interests. In actual, by legal definition, conspiracy, colluding. And that's true. But you really got to look even deeper. Even deeper still. So the 2013 prosecutions against me were verifiably more than a confluence of different interests and with different origins. So categorized strictly in that way, we got to look at it like this. There were three different cartels of people who needed me kind of removed from the chessboard, and for completely different reasons. And one could easily make the case for four. Remember, I wasn't trying to remove them. They were trying to remove me, and ultimately did. One of the cartels was Secretary of State Clinton, President Obama, and a man named John Brennan, and a few others. They all coordinated together, kind of conspiring together. But because Clinton was invested in this particular interest, I'm tempted to call it Team Kankles, but just to be accurate, I'm actually going to label this as the Chinook. Chinook as in the Chinook conspirators. Chinook meaning CH-47. This one is entirely political, and the interest was about that. It was politically devastating. Cartel number 2 was the puppet James Johnson, a few of the local detractors, Eric Holder, who was the U.S. Attorney General at the time, and of course John Brennan. Now this particular team is about just following orders to discredit me. This cartel number 2 is just a kind of a cover-up team of unwitting locals, mostly tools. But what I'm about to tell you about is cartel number 3. This was a woman named Saleha Abedin. Also, in this cartel are members of a particular royal family, and again, John Brennan. This is what I'm calling the Abedin cartel. This one, more than anything, is just about vengeance and cover-up. What I'm about to tell you about is the inaugurating event, the impetus, the interest of that particular team, the Abedin cartel. What was their problem with me? Now, just to be sure, it wasn't just me, because what you don't know, starting in 2010, that particular U.S. administration, the Obama administration, they weaponized multiple different agencies, the FBI, Homeland Security, even the IRS, by the way, and locals, to come after several of us, not just me. And by us, I refer to members of my team, a team which in 2002 didn't officially exist and didn't officially do what I'm about to describe. I hope you noticed the one common denominator in all 3 of those cabals, those cartels, was John Brennan. So for over a decade, I was called the mastermind of the targeted framing of an assassination attempt and a mastermind of framing and of developing a biological weapon. But neither one of those so-called crimes actually happened. The real mastermind, the real crime, the real mastermind of everything is that vampire, John Brennan. And you're about to find out why. Or at least why cartel number 3, the Abedin conspirators, why they needed me removed or eliminated, and the extent that they've gone to do so. And let me tell you, in the long run, if you boil it all down, it's all about the money. So really, this is kind of part 2 of the Boom Factor memo, my 2001 white paper. Do you remember I told you about Section C and how Section C went from hypothetical example to an active SAP? And let me remind you, it was not a proposal. I was not making a proposal here. It was just examples that I had done. And by the way, the Boom Factor memo, I don't want to get off course too much. The Boom Factor memo was written on the very same computer that Egg built. Egg was kind of a nickname for a man named Stephen Belvin. My Elocity computer. That may seem like a small tangent, but it becomes relevant later. Anyway, Section C went from hypothetical, and it turns out Section B didn't turn out to be very hypothetical either. Became an active SAP. And yet my hypothetical example of that section, Section B, became far more than what was intended. Section B was about the proper usage of chemical agents against those who were deemed enemy combatants under the Bush Doctrine. Note my exact specific language there. It sounds like I'm dancing around something, but it'll make sense later. Now, I want you to please remember this was 2001 when I wrote this. Think about how we all felt post 9/11. The whole world was in a different context. So if you're going to judge me, you can judge me based on that context, okay?
This call is from a federal prison.
Simplified was then anyone who supports terrorism in any way is considered an enemy combatant, no matter what that support looks like, no matter who that support actually is. Now remember, the examples in that paper, in the Boom Factor paper, the only ones that I actually used were about ricin, which causes random organ failure, and it leaves no trace. It could have been about anything, but that's what was in. I mean, I could have used other things, but that's what was used in that paper. So, fast forward from 2001 to very late July of 2002. A group of guys, call them a team, visited a city very, very far away from here, about 6,000 miles or so. The place that these 6 people visited was also home to 3 people who had not only been financing Al-Qaeda, but they were the 3 largest financial sponsors that were supporting the 9/11 attacks. And this was done through a very complicated money pipeline network that was called Al-Islamiyya Al-Rabita. The common name for it is Rabita Trust. That is what everything is about, and it reached all the way to 2013. Now, these 3 massively uber-wealthy financiers of Rabita Trust, they were also very, very high-ranking officials in their government. They were essentially cabinet-level ministers, including the defense minister of that country. These 3 men, according to the Bush Doctrine, through Rabita Trust, funded 9/11. Now, I lost people in 9/11. You probably did too. People I knew. So did most Americans. A lot of Americans lost family members in that attack. And not coincidentally, those 3 men of that country, and that country's highest level in government, they were all family members of the very same family. The most powerful family on this entire planet. Now, 2 of them, and I mean this in the literal sense, were actual princes of that family. And I do not mean this in the figurative sense, like the kings of Tupelo, who aren't actually kings, but except for in their own head. And by the way, I was not a king of Tupelo, I was an anti-king. But no, I mean this in the literal sense. These men were in an actual line of potential succession to wear an actual crown in a world where Game of Thrones is real. To put it another way, these 3 princes, cabinet members of the most powerful family on earth, they had direct ties to Rabita Trust, which then, I know it almost seems like you need a chart to follow this, but which funded bin Laden's activities, including 9/11. So now, even now, how do you feel about that? So 6 people visit the home city of these 3 princes, and while those 6 guys were there, during their visit, all 3 of those princes ceased their ability to fund Rabita Trust. Because during that very brief visit, all 3 died. Actually, let me clarify that. One of the princes, who was only 43 years old, he died of organ failure. It was attributed to his heart. This was after a simple appendectomy, now normally outpatient, routine kind of procedure. A second suffered random organ failure, so inexplicable and so baffling that the diagnosis simply read that he died of thirst, quote, died of thirst, which is insane, of course, for someone as rich as that to die of thirst. The third was actually pronounced dead before he made it to that hospital from a sudden car accident, which would have sent him there. So the bottom line is, within a matter of, I guess you could say, hours, those 3 princes would never fund terrorism ever again. Never again. But one of the members of that visiting team got stuck, and he had to hide. or rather when people with guns started running around, locking things down, running around hunting for ghosts that they kind of suspected might be complicit. That one lone sole guy couldn't get out of there, and he found, I guess refuge is the right word, and stayed in the bottom of an elevator shaft for a very long while to kind of wait out the hunters. That wait at the bottom of an elevator shaft in a public building where an atrocity may or may not have occurred, although some might still call it justice or vengeance, that spanned 4 days. 4 days at the bottom of an elevator shaft. Now, twice during that period, doors were forced open and there were flashlight beams that were scanned down the shaft, but not thoroughly enough, because I knew if I came out, I would have been shot. Now, for the record, I prefer not to be shot. I have more than once been shot at, but no bullet has ever penetrated my skin, and I'd kind of like to keep it that way. On what ended up being day 4, I've found my safe way out, exhausted, just covered in black, running on adrenaline for 4 days too, without food or water or sleep. It takes a toll, and I actually think I'm still paying for it. With some help from someone in that city, we'll call him Professor A, I got back to my team. And by the way, that person is important because you'll hear that again, Professor A. I got back to my team, and things had gone wrong, obviously, and we were now kind of stuck in that city in what would be what could turn out to be a very hostile place. So what do? Now, prior to our visit there, I was specifically told, if you get into trouble, do not contact the COS, the chief of station here, or anyone that's connected. Do not contact the chief of station. Now that is the strangest thing to say ever, because that should obviously be the first. If we get into trouble, that should be the first person that we should contact. The chief of station should know the operational details of the full PACE. But my impression that I got was the reason for that was that the COS was in the dark and needed to stay that way. Well, why? That's unprecedented. That never happens. That's completely absurd. And for 22 years now, it's been my thought that there was some reason that the agency did not trust the chief of station in that city. Well, why not? Was it because that particular COS had close ties to that family? Because he did. He had, in fact, even converted to Islam. Also unheard of. Think about that. A Wahhabist Muslim chief of station in a country where Wahhabism is the primary problem. An Islamist chief of station in a region where radical Islam is the problem. So that's been my thought for the last 22 years. Until recently, until the directors, the Way brothers, until they started digging around and doing interviews and turning over rocks for the last, 2.
This call is from a federal prison.
2.5 years or so. Even interviewing George W. Bush himself, which strangely enough, inexplicably, did not make it into the documentary series as you saw. Or at least he's not on the transcript that I got, because I haven't actually seen it. I know they went and interviewed him, but did nothing with that. You see, the chief of station at that time was a man named John Brennan. And if you were to ask John Brennan about 2002, about Operation Vengeance right now, he would not only deny knowledge of it, he would also deny that it ever even happened and that those 3 princes are still alive. And by the way, they're not. Or he'd say it was all just complete coincidence. But now I think differently. And I'm sorry that it took me 22 years to get here, but I am now certain that not only did he know about it, but I believe he now simply does not want his old buddies, his close friends in that royal family, to know or to think that he was a part of it. Because that family would, and did, by the way, retaliate, lethally so, against anyone that was involved in Operation Vengeance that they thought they had permission. That's a harder thing to explain, to get to. He, Brennan, needed to portray to that royal family that he was completely clueless, with his hands clean, like they always are, every time he's involved in an operation. However, I now say that he not only knew, but he helped pick the targets, because he was actually aiding in that royal family's infighting in their very, very deadly Game of Thrones. I have no way of proving that, but that's my feeling now that some other things have been uncovered and really put some thought into it. Especially, I can't prove it from in here, not under these conditions. But what that intel did uncover, the Rabida Trust money connections and the primary funders of 9/11, what it revealed led to the convenient elimination of challengers in that line of succession under the guise of following the Bush Doctrine and kind of cooperating with the U.S. war on the sudden new at that time, war on terror. I'm contending now that certain members of that royal family not only knew of that Operation Vengeance, but did so with John Brennan's help, and they allowed it to occur. Now, of course, I wasn't thinking all of this at that time, because we're talking about early August of 2011 by the time I came out of the elevator shaft. I was just doing my duty, my role, by the way, which, in my mind, no one else in the world was qualified to do. It had to be me, or at least that's how I thought then. It's naive, maybe, but that's how I felt then. And in 2002, we all needed to do something. So, getting back to the day of, Professor A helped me get back to my team and coordinate with a Sunni friend of mine who was an elite-level black belt, literally an Olympic-level black belt, in an adjacent country to the north. My Taekwondo friend there, through a relative of his, a close relative of his, coordinated a series of fueling sites and coordinates of those sites. But because we couldn't take the roads, we couldn't just pile in a car and drive out of there, my idea was to go over them. This required that fuel, which someone we call the hedgehog could coordinate those multiple sites. But it also would require a helicopter. So my Taekwondo black belt buddy, he had a relative who knew exactly where one would be, and it would be ready to fly in 2 days. So around 2 a.m. on that day, local time, an air ambulance was borrowed, procured. If you want to use the word stolen, that's fine. I just don't like it. And so it took off, and it flew northwest with 6 of us crammed aboard just to get us out of there. The pilot, by the way, well, never mind. With each of the refueling stops at the Hedgehog's strategically positioned barrels, I'd try to signal.
This call is from a federal prison.
One fuel node at a time, signal allowing via a cell phone that Professor A had gotten me. Just a few seconds after liftoff at our last refuel, the last one, the entire thing, a Eurocopter 350, which, by the way, is just, don't. If you ever have an opportunity to buy one of these, don't. It started shaking worse than Michael J. Fox after 6 cups of coffee and crack in a washing machine. That was the last thing that I remember about the crash itself. By the time I was coherent, I found myself in a hospital in Germany under a John Doe type name. I was broken into bits and pieces: right fibula, right ankle, right big toe, 2 left lower ribs. My right occipital skull was, stapled shut. My nose was broken and just smashed. Lost a tooth. My right thumb was broken. My right hand was broken. I still have hardware in this to this day. I still set off metal detectors. I wasn't allowed to see my team at that hospital, the rest of them. The Air Force doctor, or the physician's assistant, said that I'd probably be there for 4 months. I was I was visited, and I was told during that visit that there is no team because nothing happened. But I just kind of needed to know that they were alive. Well, it turns out they weren't officially, and neither was I. You see, what you were told, what the public was told back then, was that, quote, 6 U.S. servicemen died in a training accident, a training exercise in Jordan. Well, what you were told back then was false. First off, none of us were active, quote, servicemen or DOD. Also, we didn't die. Also, it wasn't a training exercise. And also, I don't think we quite made it all the way to Jordan. But that's not what you were told. And that's not what my mother was told. My mother, a 4-foot 11-inch woman who had already lost one son, was told that I was dead. For months, she did not know any better. Now, months later, I obviously did make it back. I did return. I returned to Tupelo. I was on crutches to my now estranged second wife, who had been babysitting my 100-year-old grandfather in Kentucky, and whose father, her father, had just bought her a house just in order to entice her away from me. Even on crutches and even broken, I took my wife to Thanksgiving dinner at my mom's house in Meridian. And, showing my mother that I actually was alive, not just a phone call. It was the most awkward Thanksgiving ever, but it was probably the best hug I ever got. Before she sent me away to try to save my marriage, which was as broken as my body, and sent me home with my cat that she'd been babysitting, Victoria, at least one of them would stick around. The cat did, not the wife. My wife, at that time, Annette, she didn't. So for years, I looked over my shoulder, but eventually I stopped being paranoid. I just resumed life, even resumed training. Then, I think it was around 2006, I was shown that Professor A, who had helped us escape in 2002, had been snagged by that country and beaten and tortured, and eventually was handed over to the U.S., the FBI, who actually accepted the fake evidence of the contrived crime that was labeled, he was labeled a terrorist, and he was accused of playing both sides. The U.S. DOJ and a federal judge actually accepted the fake claims and the phony evidence of that foreign country, and he was thrown into a U.S. prison, all because he had helped someone years earlier. This man who had gotten us out of there safely in 2002, he ended up thrown very deep into a U.S. federal prison, all because he had helped someone years earlier, all because he had helped me years earlier. I believe, I have no way of knowing this either, but I believe that what happened, they found him, they tortured him. I believe what happened was that there was a cell phone, that cell phone, that was left behind at the scene of the crash. You can blame me if you want to. I totally get it, but I was not conscious, so it wouldn't do a lot of good to do that. There were 2 numbers on that phone, plus the number of the phone itself. 2 numbers that were on it. Number 1 was Egg, my computer tech guy, and the other number that was on it was my Taekwondo friend from the country just north. Plus, there was the number of the phone. All 3 of those numbers, or the number of the phone itself, could lead to, and I suspect actually did, could lead to Professor A. So, then we flash forward a couple of years. In 2006, my Taekwondo friend, the same one who had helped with our 2002 escape, in other words, located the helicopter and everything for us, He was about to be on the 2008 Taekwondo, the Olympic Taekwondo team of the new Iraq, who hadn't really been able to field a team in quite a while. But 2008 was going to be their year, and he was with his other teammates, and he was on his way to black belt camp, which was in Jordan that year, on a bus, leaving from Sadr City. That bus never arrived. His daughter, Maha, waited for him. My friend and his teammates, every single one of his teammates, was vanished. 17 people. Now, a couple years later, in the Iraqi desert, that bus was found, along with the remains of my friend and Maha's father and all his teammates found nearby. They had all been just executed summarily in the desert. All I saw was of my friend Saidi was a picture of a pile of bones in the hallway of Sadr City Hospital. There was no way to tell even who.
This call is from a federal prison.
The families couldn't even sort out who was who. And worse than that, there was no way to console, especially from here, no way to console Maha, who had earned her own black belt, by the way, by the time she was 14. She would never see her father again. All because he had helped someone years earlier. Because he had helped me years earlier. Then, 2009, there was a leak in 2009. It was a hack, maybe, some medical records from Humana. I suspect it was a specific hack, and there aren't that many entities that have access to that kind of thing. You can call it a hack if you want to, but it really isn't. It's just a known backdoor. Remember, some of us from 2002 needed a bit of PT. Even if it was just like the initial purchase way back then of crutches or a cane. So in 2010, members of that 2002 team, or at least the ones who had some physical therapy records with Humana, and the two people who had helped, they began being legally prosecuted too, for nonsensical stuff. Even the IRS came after us. A couple of guys were ruined when that particular administration, the 2010 U.S. administration, just wrecked their lives. Just all on contrived charges. A couple of those people were actually thrown into prison. Now, because I had beaten the IRS, who came after me around that time, they were claiming that I owed $30,000. And they were going to prosecute me, throw me in jail if necessary. I actually, though, I beat them. So I thought I was free. I thought essentially it was over. But in the summer of 2012, I got a phone call telling me that Egg, again, my computer guy, my techie, the guy who built my, who had built the Elocity computer, and the other person from that phone, there were some messages for me in 2002. The phone call in 2012 told me that Egg was dead. I had known Egg for a very long time, even since I lived in Meridian. He was an innocent, but an innocent who had helped someone years earlier. That's when I recognized that somebody was closing in. They were closing in on me. Back in 2002, the Muslim World League, which was funded by Rabita Trust, had its finances kind of plummet with the loss of their three benefactors. The person who ran the PR for Muslim World League, the MWL, was someone named Syed Abedin, using the IMMA, the Institute for Muslim Minority Affairs, which was as tasked by Wael Hamza Jalaluddin and Abdullah Omar Nassif to track down who was responsible for that 2002 event. Then that job was taken over by a woman, Sayed Abedin's wife, whose name? Saleha Abedin. Now, Saleha Abedin has a daughter. That daughter worked for Saleha Abedin on multiple projects, but by 2009, Saleha Abedin's daughter had actually penetrated the U.S. State Department and was a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. She was at the right hand of Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who, by the way, had gotten insane amounts, of money from Rabita Trust funds. That right hand of Hillary Clinton, Saleha Abedin's daughter, is named Huma Abedin. This means that the U.S. government's foreign policy agency was infiltrated, and at the highest level, by a Wahhabist spy who really supersedes countries. Now, because she's also just ridiculously pretty, she had no problem snagging and marrying a U.S. congressman by the name of Anthony Weiner, who we all know now played very fast, very loose, with information that he wasn't supposed to have. But I want you to remember, and he's caught hell for having that information on his laptop. But remember, the classified files on Weiner's laptop, and yes, that's a real name, actually came from the State Department. He wouldn't have had access to them. They were State Department documents. They were classified. They were not congressional documents. So she, the Deputy Secretary of State, put those files there, not him. His computer contraband was of kind of a different type, really. So as far as the other, she let him take the fall for her espionage for a terrorist organization. And this included, on that laptop, medical records.
This call is from a federal prison.
Now, simultaneously, that very same royal family had infiltrated the White House itself. That was in the form of John Brennan, who still had ties to those Wahhabists who wanted him to learn who was responsible for the very 2002 operation that he claimed he didn't know anything about, an operation that he claimed to the royal family he had no knowledge of. Now, this occurred after John Brennan had broken into the State Department records in 2008 during the campaign using an old CIA backdoor, and he actually altered those State Department records, the passport office records, on or of a candidate at the time, a candidate named Barack Obama, who later became president. He then paid him back, Brennan back, by creating a completely new White House-based job just for Brennan, with the full resources of Department of Homeland Security behind him. And that's really, really important. What that means is the Wahhabists now had at least two very high-ranking operatives installed into the Obama administration, and the rest was just a matter of time. Hoping that you will be able to, if you've been following anything I've just been saying in this call, I'm hoping that you're starting to see some dots connect there as to that third cabal, that third cartel, and why on earth they needed me removed from their strategic chessboard. There's a lot more to this story than meets the eye, but they finally caught up with me in 2000, I guess you could say 13. Anyway, I'll start to connect those dots in future calls, and then you'll understand the connections more. It's not this stupid surface level story that you've been fed. There was no feud between me and some guy who lived there in Tupelo. That was insane and just plain silly. And you'll also understand why I felt like the safest place, the safest thing to do, the only way to keep my family safe starting in 2012, actually maybe even a little earlier, was to kind of push them away. It's sad, but it's true. Until the next call, that's my 3 chords in the truth.